things. So you may recognize this scene. This is the ping pong tables at the 190th Street station. And I'm going to put up the image so you can see it even clearer. So, I was walking to the subway one day, and it just, every day there's kind of like a new sunrise moment that I love seeing in this particular park. So there's one day when there was this kid with a backpack looking at his phone, just, resting on the ping pong table. And I love the way that the light was coming through. Many of you probably seen a similar scene before. So like the other picture, part of the job here is to translate this into this piece of paper, which is square, right? So this particular image is taller. It's like a portrait orientation. And so very much like if you're painting outside live, you kind of have to take some risks or just make some decisions about how you're going to crop it. Anybody have thoughts on exactly how you would crop this into a square? That's okay. So what I would do here because I like the shadows that are being cast here. I like these lines. And I especially love how you can see the light reflecting off the trunk there's in that sliver on both of these. I want to retain as much of the lower half as I can, while also allowing the colors up here to really show. So I'm thinking, if it's a square, that I'm gonna maybe cut it off right here, so like down here, and then going up to here. All right, so I'm gonna start translating that into my square. Sometimes you may actually just have to move the actual image so that it lines up the way you need it to be on your paper. So for example, the bottom edge of my paper is lining up to, let's say it's like the bottom part of that, where the post is. So I'm actually just gonna start with that post. I think that's a good landmark to work with. And as I showed Mac before, it's okay to be loose here. Probably preferable to be loose, especially when we're talking about watercolor paintings. We don't want it to be too rigidly stuck or adhering to like pencil lines, right? It's okay if you need the pencil to be part of the image, and if that's what you need to be able to capture something as you intend it. But I think it's also, for me, it's been a good skill. It's been a good skill to learn how to render things without being too like slavishly trying to mimic and trying to like kill myself to get something exactly the way it is, or else it's a horrible piece of work. So I'm just loosely getting these objects here. I'm getting the proportions in. The person, just enough so that it may be hard for you to see with under this light, but and part of this skill of just rendering, capturing something loosely, requires you to hold a pencil in a way that's looser. So that's something also that I've learned in the last couple of years. Like don't hold it like you're writing, but hold it like you're just trying to make marks. So, for example, if the paper is up, tilted up, it's actually easier to go like this. So just pretend like this whole surface is on an incline, and I'm just trying to put marks down like this. So I'm using more of my forearms, right, instead of the wrist. When you use your wrist, you're more liable to fall into the trap of like trying to get things very exact, and because it's more like writing. So this way you're just really just trying to get marks down. I'm just getting the biggest, thickest branches, I'm getting them down so that I can remember, like, I want these areas to be pretty dark later. That's part of you may have noticed from my paintings, I love like the contrast in nature. I love the stark contrasting shapes. There's a tree back here that I want to capture. I also picked this image because I think it has a good mix of being able to, in an abstract way, capture a lot without having to worry about so much detail that may not be able to fit into an hour session. So here, we have, the figures always can be a challenge, but if you just kind of ignore the figure right now, we have a few big shapes, right? We have the table that reflects a lot of light in the scene. We have two big trees. And then we have all this color, right? The color meaning we have the background. The background is pretty bright. Not a lot of definition. And then we have all these wonderful fall colors that would be on top of that background as a layer. And a couple of things I'm keeping in mind as I'm drawing, I'm also thinking about, okay, which areas what are the values here? Which areas do I want to keep as bright as possible? Which areas do you think do you see in this should be kept like very, very bright?
The table for sure.
The table,
Yep.
the edges of the tree where the sun.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think you've cut the sky off, right? Pretty much.
I did, yeah, I cut a lot of the sky out. There'll be some, you know, we can maybe even cheat it a little bit, but, you know, like up here, the shape of the building back there can help us define, okay, this is where the upper edge is. And what I would do is I'm going to lay down a very, very slight, I don't even know if it's a blue or if it's more of a purplish wash in the background. And I'm also just going to keep in mind, like as you guys said, there are edges here. So I'm going to just carefully use the tip of my pencil to just like border. I'm going to border in these light areas. Okay, and we know that the ping pong table has that brighter area. And then we have the shadows down here that kind of click this. And I'm using my pencil to make sure I get the perspective pretty well. So I can just take my pencil, line it up with the shadows that I see here, and I'll just take that over here and just kind of make sure I'm doing it similar. And that works okay. There's benches are always hard to draw, you know, because there's a lot of different surfaces there. So I'm not going to worry too much about that bench. There's a few parts of the bench that if you get right, it looks like a bench. And that's really all we care about, because it's pretty small in the picture anyway. And then there's like some areas of the fence, right? The vertical, what do you call those, slats? Or the vertical pieces have bright edges to them as well. That may be something we can approximate. But I'm also not going to worry too much about them, because if we fuss over those like vertical lines in the fence too much, it just draws too much attention to it. It's important to just focus on like the big shapes that are part of your composition, and then how you're going to translate the values, and then we'll worry about these finishing touches. I see the fence as kind of a finishing touch that we can attack near the end. And I'm going to just sketch in lightly the bench that's here. I know it's kind of hard to see. This is probably hard to see in the light, but hopefully it'll stand out more to you once I start laying down some colors. I'm sorry, I didn't even put in I forgot to put in the pole here. So I think that's a useful element to have. So I'm just gonna if I was really trying to be exact here, I'd probably use a ruler. And I'm going in with my pencil, my eraser, just erasing some lines that may have been too dark. I don't want too many dark lines with my pencils. I just want to be able to see it enough before I start painting. Any questions so far?
Not a question, but when you said something about vertical lines in the fence and then the pole, if you were to focus on those, it would be more of a rendering than really a painting, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think people can debate the term rendering too. Like someone was challenging me on how I used that term a while ago. I think this kind of goes to the debate between like what's fine art and what's illustration too. I tend to be more. I like capturing details, and but I've learned over the years how to prioritize them in a way that ultimately, for me, the most important thing is if it's a pleasing picture and composition. So there's a way I think that we can capture things like the vertical lines of the fence and the flagpole. We can capture the essence of those things without feeling like we have to really, really accurately portray them. Like it would be really fast, you know. So, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna lay down some cooler, like a cooler wash for the background, because I don't want it to be pure white, but I don't want to put too much pigment down there because I want it to be bright. And I think it's kind of a hazy background. It kind of plays tricks on you because you know that the sun is coming from that direction. So things that are in the sun's way are reflecting some warmth. But so there's multiple ways you can go about that. I'm going to err on the side of because it's early morning, and because it's early morning is similar to near sunset, right? In terms of the way the sunlight is coming through the atmosphere. So I'm gonna go with like a kind of diluted purplish to try to get that across. So I'm gonna put down this ultramarine blue, and I'm gonna warm it up with a little of the quinacridone rose. Because remember, blue and red make a purple. And I'm just testing it on my paper here. I think I'm good with that. And what I'll do is I'll put down a very light coat of that, and then I will put in another layer, the same color, to indicate the building that's there. So let me just, and I'm trying to pay attention to there's light to the light areas, right, in the trunk. I don't want to cover those up. So I'm going to kind of stay to the upper parts of the paper. And I'm going to stay away from covering up the branches for now. I'm wetting the paper. And even though we have the leaves, the foliage in front of the background, I'm okay with covering that up even with a bit of the purple. All right. So now I'm going to put this down. Very light. Maybe even a little too much there. So I'm wiping off some of it. It's maybe a little too purplish for me, but. So you see I'm dabbing my brush onto the paper towel to help me wipe off some of this excess. I think what I'm going to do is, for the building itself, I'm going to add a little bit more of a bluish tint to this. You know, this is not exact, but I'm going to put some in here because we see that the branches actually split up around there. And we see that this color permeates that background actually pretty, you know, I think the buildings do extend out this way. So I'm just going to go ahead and put them in. We're going to actually end up covering that up with some of the foliage. Believe it or not, it will actually, I think it will actually, we'll be able to successfully cover them up. I'm using the edge of the brush to make these a little bit more diffused so they don't stick out so much. Okay, so there's a bit of a haziness there that we're capturing. I'm going to put a little bit down here as well. All right, I'll try to move faster. The next is, I'm looking at the lightest colors of the foliage, and I'm looking at some of the yellows that are there. There are also some, I would say, of my palette, we have some yellow ochre, we have some burnt sienna, so lovely fallish colors along with some green in there. I'm going to be very, very rough with this, and I'm going to start with trying to indicate these yellow greenish areas. I'm not going to do them as like individual leaves, but I'm going to do larger strokes. And what I'll do is I'm going to use a warmish yellow, and I'll mix a little bit of the sap green that I have. And I'm going to start loosely putting this in, not even really paying that much attention to where they are exactly in the picture. And I can even cover up the places where we see branches. And that's because the branches are part of that later layer of dark paint that we're actually going to cover up, they will actually cover up those lighter, these lighter passages where the yellow leaves are. So I'm not worrying about that at all. And you'll see that, you know, when we put these spots of yellowish green down, they'll also neatly change color, change in appearance a bit because they're on top of this purple. So that's also a nice effect. You know, we're not trying to like be like, it's okay if the colors bleed into each other and mix and take on a new appearance. You know, that's part of the fun of playing around with watercolor. They're transparent. Okay, so I've gotten this yellowish green down. I'm gonna put a little bit more down here. And I'm going to turn to the yellow ochre. And I'm actually just mixing straight into what I have left in the dish. Okay, I'm going to start putting some of this in there very loosely. And I'm remembering, you know, that there are areas on the tree trunks that I want to be careful not to cover up because we want to keep them brighter. Okay, we're working in layers here. So now I'm going to turn to the burnt sienna, which is slightly darker. It's darker in tone, but still like that very earthy, leafy quality. I'm going to just start putting it in, and we'll just see what happens when it blends in. I realize that there's some greenish, yellowish, like little spots right here that I want to capture. It's kind of nice to keep in there. Oh, sorry, I put it in the wrong place. It's okay. All right, I'm going to start putting down a very dark tone for the tree trunks. And what I'm going to do is, because, you know, there's brownish tints to it, brown, I'm going to actually add brown, which is my burnt umber. I'm going to add this brown to the blue, the bluish purplish mix that I had here already. And I'm going to add a little bit more blue because that'll help us darken it, because a brown and a blue will help us approach a gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the trunk that's over here, and I'm going to try to carefully leave that white reflected edge. Okay. You can't see that it's a white reflective edge yet because we haven't defined the areas around on the other side of that, but we will. And then let's do this one. I know time has gone by really fast. Um, if you're able to, I'm happy to stay on and work on this a bit more. If you're able to. Right now it's 6:51.
I can stay on an extra 20 minutes or so.
Great,
I'd love to.
great,
Yeah, me too.
fantastic. So once we start putting these grays down, I love putting the darker colors in. I'm actually going to add a little bit of Payne's gray here. I love putting the darker colors in because we just start to really see the image come to life. Notice I'm painting over, I'm basically like going into that fence area and not paying too much attention to like where these lines are supposed to be, where the slats are. But there's opportunities to actually hint at it, and you'll see that it'll become more apparent in a little bit. See, all of this gets really dark in there. There's opportunities here to like do something in the background to help bring out that bright edge in the front. You see that there's actually like splotches of dark areas throughout this. I'm being very, very loose here. I mean, this is almost like Impressionism, right? I'm not really trying to figure out, okay, exactly where does this grouping of leaves starts and ends, but I'm just loosely like squinting at it, looking to see the bright and dark areas. When you actually do the negative spaces, that actually gets you closer to me, it gets you close to the reality that's in front of you. If you squint your eyes and just kind of paint it as if you're squinting, you'll eventually get there. It takes a little bit of patience, right? I feel like I'm in the ugly stage right now, but it will get there. Also, we want to be careful about using too much Payne's gray because Payne's gray has a very cold, um, there's blue in it, so it can be very cold. When we're talking about organic things like living things, if we put too much Payne's gray on it to indicate shadow or the dark side, it could come off looking too like inanimate, too cold. So it's a good idea to keep some warmth in that by, for example, using the brown and the blue to create a dark version or a dark gray. So areas that are in dark usually will still have some warmth in it, even if it's hard to see. I saw your message, Mac. Thank you. All right, let me just trying to fill in some areas here where we can imply that bright edge of the trunk. There's some really dark areas here, but there's actually some green in that. So I'm remembering to add some green to my dark mixture. All right, and you'll see that on the right side here, I actually forgot about that pole. So it's actually getting lost in the paint that I already put down, but it's okay. We can deal with that. All right, so basically I've been treating this top half of the top 2/3 of the square. I'm gonna start working on the bottom. This will also give the top some time to dry, and it might help us have a fresh perspective on it when we finish the major pieces down below. So the bottom, you know, it's actually, if you squint at it, there's only a few like major areas that we have to really be concerned about. What do we want? You know, my question for myself is how to capture the ground, right? The ground, you know, we know in our mind that the ground is like a grayish color, where the sun is going past the ping pong table, it's lightening it up a lot. Almost, it's warmer, right? Because that's where the sunlight is hitting. So we have to keep in mind that the ground has its own local color, but we're also keeping in mind that the sunlight is passing through all these colorful leaves. So in some ways, we could get away with using some parts of the colors from the top to actually color in some of these areas down here that are supposed to be bright. So I want to be mindful of that aspect, but also mindful of the fact that, you know, the ground itself has one layer that's bright, and then on top of that, there are areas that are darker, especially the shadow being cast by the person and the ping pong table. The way I would approach that is to just paint the whole, like basically the entire, from the wall all the way to the bottom. I would just start with one coat of the same color, a brighter color to represent this, because that color actually will find itself in many parts of this bottom part, including the ping pong table. So even though the ping pong table, that side that he's sitting on, is bright, it's, it probably actually is close to the brightness in terms of value, the brightness of those bright edges of the trunks. So maybe for now I will, see, this is part of the internal struggle you have to face. It's like, okay, the ping pong table is the same brightness, same level, same value as the bright area of the ground. And yeah, that's pretty much the same as the edge of the trunks. So I can mimic what I did before and just leave those white, and then we can go back in later and maybe darken it by putting some color in there. Well, let's just try it. I'll try coloring in the whole. I will try coloring in with a darker tone at the wall, and I'm going to use a lighter wash to do the rest. Let's see how that works. And just remembering that there's this bench here, these benches, so there's ways we can leave some of those structures intact, so it will help us later. Yeah, and then the back of the person's head also has these highlights, so I'm going to try to just preserve those. And I am going to color. I'm going to color him. Why not? All right, and I'm going to keep going down here. I know that there's branches and stuff, or not branches, there's leaves on the ground. So I'm going to kind of leave a few white spots there where I can color in with the color of leaves. All right, I'm going to try to connect that dark area that I've just painted with the shadows that are down here. And I'm going to add some Payne's gray to my brown blue mixture. I'm going to make it pretty wet. Did we lose you briefly, Mac? I thought you needed to go.
I did. I just, I'm actually walking, but I'm listening.
Oh, okay. So I'm trying to connect the dark areas now. And again, you're seeing this in real time, so I didn't plan this out. I didn't, before the call, I looked at the picture, but I didn't have a firm plan for how I was going to handle this. So you're kind of seeing me work this out in real time. I'm seeing some things that I should have done differently here. So what I've created so far is, in terms of a value structure, is I'm using the white of the paper to indicate the brightest areas, right, on the trees. Even though, if you look at this picture, those are not white, right? Those are simply the brightest areas in the picture. The great thing about watercolor painting is that we can use the white of the paper to stand in for the brightest value. So even though this is not like a realistic rendering, it helps to convince the viewer when we actually account for these bright areas and we leave those as like the brightest values. So as I refine this a little bit more, those white areas will stand out even more, and it should work within the system that we've created in this particular structure, in this painting. So it's just part of, each painting has its own kind of like program, right? It has its own set of rules that you are coming up with. It's not necessarily the rules of the picture that you're referencing. It's the rules that make the painting work, if that makes sense. I'm going to just do a few more dark areas here to really bring out the structure of this table. This is where it does help to have a steadier hand. So like really painting in some finer lines. Sometimes that's to be expected when you're dealing with a man-made object, right? And notice I'm going back in, trying to tease out some more of the shape of the person. It's still very rough, but because I have my pencil lines, I'm able to at least follow the rough contours of his body that I noticed earlier. And you don't even need that much to indicate that this is a person. I'm noticing in here it's not as bright as the other areas, or shouldn't be as bright. Any questions so far? And then there's this great area right here that actually is kind of dark, actually. So I'm going to lift up this area here. I see that now as it's drying, everything dries, the watercolor dries lighter than you expect it. I'm going to go back in and make the wall darker, and that will actually help with bringing out some more contrast. Sorry. I want it to be a little warmer. And you see how there are these slats in the bench. I can kind of hint at those as I go across. So you're designing at the same time as you're figuring out the values. And you just need hints. You just need hints of what's going on to convince. Right? So you can see like you're hinting at the benches here without really even describing that much of them. I'm going to add a little bit more dark to the trunks here. I'm going to add some color to warm up the areas here where leaves are on the ground. And I'm going to just start sprinkling some more color. I think this will help us as we try to approximate the leaves that are on the ground. Sometimes it helps like to just go straight into the color in your palette and put it down here so that you're not introducing more water into it. And you're kind of just painting directly. All right, I'm gonna go back with some more darks. I like putting darks in because it really helps to define the image and the relationships. And you know, there's a lot of branches in here. We don't want to draw all of them, but it helps to hint at them by like kind of staggering or brush through it and hinting at the branches. There's still room to like cover up some of those portions of the branches. You know, and we break up the lines because that's more like what happens in real life. Because leaves will come in front of the branch, behind it, etc. And it helps to go in with a thinner, smaller brush for those branches that are thinner. And again, this is all very impressionistic. I tend to go this route when I'm painting a nature, a landscape, or a scene that has a majority of, you know, foliage and shrubs and trees and all that. I'm seeing there's like too many bright areas in there, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more of the brush and foliage. Any questions? I hope you're finding this helpful. You can kind of see how I'm thinking in real time, kind of the real struggles that come with it sometimes.
I was gonna say I don't have questions, but I'm finding it fascinating.
Great. I'm going to kind of exaggerate his blue, the blue that's on the man's jeans. And I'm just sort of testing the blue that I'm. There's a good amount of blue on him, actually. Yeah, you don't really have to do much for this particular figure, and maybe that's why I picked it. It's relatively, featureless in terms of figures. It's far away. It's a good way to challenge yourself always, anyway, to like paint something with a figure in it. This Payne's gray, by the way, I did squeeze out a bunch from my tube into it recently, like earlier this afternoon. So compared with the other colors that are in my palette, it's a lot juicier and like thicker. So when I go into it, I'm taking out a lot more onto my brush. So that's why I'm often like trying to like thin it out here in front of you. Normally it would have dried, it would have had time, longer time to dry. But so now I'm going to go in and just add some shadows here. Just looking for additional areas where I can really touch it up with a bit of dark and bring out some of these. So like in here, there's much darker areas. All right, so one of the things I want to deal with at the end here is the fence. Again, because it's complicated to try to preserve all the white reflections, the bright portions. Sometimes you just have to hint at it, and you can do so by actually lifting up from the paper. And I'm going to get a thinner brush for that. Sometimes this works better on certain papers, but for example, I can go like this, and with a moist brush and a thin brush that allows me to get a thin line, I'm actually lifting off a little bit. It may be hard for you to see right now, but as it dries, you'll see the effect. And you have to constantly wipe it in between because you don't want to just like wipe pigment again onto the next stroke. So I think this may be a little too hard to see. The other approach actually is to just go back with some of the dark paint and emphasize certain areas. And if you just hint at the vertical lines in certain places, the mind fills in the rest. And here's, this brush doesn't feel like a great brush. You have to twirl it in your paint to get a point. So that's helpful when you need to actually make really accurate lines, like here. So yeah, so here, and like so in these light areas, you can really hint at the vertical lines pretty well. So it's 7:22. I think Sarah already dropped off. Karen, are you okay for like 2 more minutes? And Mac?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I can stay for a few more minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for indulging me here. I think we made some good progress. I'm just gonna try to add a little bit more definition in some places here. And sometimes it takes multiple layers to really get to a really nice dark with watercolor. So yeah, depending on what you desire out of painting with watercolor, this I tend to be more on the illustrative side. Like I'm not necessarily out to be a fine art artist, or that's probably not my strength. But I think my strengths are more in like interpreting what I see and turning it into something that is pleasing. As opposed to like, I'm not out for like super hyper realism. Although it is fun if you can get something to be very realistic. But that's not always my first goal. My goal is more along the lines of capturing a mood. So I'm going to work on this pole here. I don't know if that made sense, what I just said, but so you see how
I think it did. Yeah, capturing the mood. You want to just say a little bit on how you're doing that by contrast, right? By
yeah,
cools and warms, lights and darks.
yeah. Yeah, so you see how like this pole and the base that it's on, I'm hinting at it by capturing the darkness around the lines here, and that way I can leave that part um, untouched, and it's white, and it basically will be, it represents that same contrast that we see in the picture. I'm gonna darken this area of the pole to hint at, you know, the three-dimensional, or like the what's the word? That it's a pole, that it's not a stick, you know. So I'm laying down a darker layer on the for the right side. And I'm going to go in and just kind of try to soften that edge so it feels a little more spherical. And then I see that this area of the base down here is darker. So I'm going to just put another layer of the same, pretty much the same paint.
So Francis, would to you fine art would be like more detail? Is that what you're thinking? Like to make something realistic, it would be finer details, finer lines or something?
Yeah, I think it's like on the spectrum of representational, it would be, I don't know what the word is. It's more of I am in the representational end of the spectrum, but within that spectrum, there are people who are, they're all about capturing it very realistically, and like there's no room, there's no interpretation. You know, there aren't lines in nature, right? Like many of these areas in here are lines that I've imposed, and I've basically decided, okay, this is a line, when in actuality it's a gradation, right, from one value to another. And a fine artist, I think, would really focus on getting those aspects as true to life as possible. For me, I'm kind of like in between that and being an illustrator.
Thank you.
I may have to refine that because I've been reading about Norman Rockwell, and you know, he's like one of the greatest illustrators, and he was always poo-pooed by fine artists. But it's not that he didn't capture things realistically. He was very realistic. But there's a graphic design element to what he did. So yeah, I'm gonna think about that a little bit more. So I think we're at a good stopping place with this. Any questions?
No questions, but it was really fun. And tonight I painted along with you.
Oh, awesome. Do you want to show us?
Sure. My camera is over here. Doesn't really show up very well.
Can you,
Nice.
oh wait, I don't see it. Hold on.
It's down below on me. I have to scroll
Oh
down.
yeah, I see it. That's awesome. Great. Fantastic. Do you mind sending me a picture of it later?
Yeah, sure. Do that right now.
That's great.
Are you going to work on this one anymore, Francis, or are you done with this one?
I think I'm done.
Okay.
Karen, can you hold it up to the screen one more time?
Sure.
Great, thank you. All right. If there's no questions, I think we can end it there. And thank you for sitting through this. It was really fun.
Oh, thanks for sharing. And it was fun to hang out with other people.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Likewise, Karen, and thank you, Francis.
Yeah,
No problem.
thank